technology, such as issues of digital divides. And we are also facing not only media, but entire the South Asia community and the world are facing misinformation, and we are not being escaped from it. There is also an issue of internet freedom, political and corporate influence in newsroom, and there is also an issue of access to the social media and internet shutdown in parts of South Asia. If we see the old press freedom index, the latest report, almost all South Asian countries are in the bottom half out of the 100 countries in the list. And I think I will not go into that detail, but I would just wanted to share the format of our discussion today. We have, first we would have individual perspective sharing round. I am considering to give up to 7 minutes for each of our distinguished panelists, to shed light on the issue, on the theme, and I hope they would share about their country perspective. And in the second round, we would deep dive into the discussion, and would going to focus on the challenges and issues of South Asian community we are facing. And in the third round, we would have question and comments round. We would going to take the a few of questions from our eminent audience, as well as we would also going to take their comments and observations on the discussion. Finally, we would have prospects and way forward round. We would briefly quick summarize about the discussion, and would sum up some draw some remarks for the way forward. So since we are conducting this session in India, and India is one of the largest democracy, and India is face of South Asia, representation of South Asia in global large world, I'm going to request Professor Dr. Kulveen to share India's country perspective regarding the theme of today's discussion. Ma'am, session is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Leknath Pandey, for the opportunity to speak about the status of press freedom in South Asia with a contextual perspective from India. At the outset, my compliments to Professor Padma Rani, Professor V.P. Sanjay, and the entire team at Manipal Institute of Communication for organizing this ICA Regional Hub. And also, my sincere compliments to the team for recognizing the need to organize such a panel on the status of press freedom in South Asia. And it is an absolute pleasure to be with the panelists from our neighboring countries, Nepal, and with global experience like Professor Bhanu Acharya. And of course, a pleasure to be on the same panel with dearest Professor Bushra Rahman from Pakistan. All of these experiences are going to be crucial in trying to come up with a way forward in our journey as media, as mediatized communication, and as the future of press, especially in the context of the Indian subcontinent and South Asia in general. Now, coming to India, when we talk about the situation of India, it brings to my mind these two visuals. If some of us from India can recognize, he's Mr. Ravish Kumar in both the visuals, a senior journalist. Now, these two visuals are from 2016 and 2022. In the year 2016, one of the national broadcast channels, that is NDTV India, underwent a ban. Government banned, or government asked the channel to go off air for 24 hours for their coverage of a particular issue, that is Pulwama attacks. And the government expressed its concerns with regards to the coverage that it may not be in line with the national security concerns. In protest, this particular program was hosted by Mr. Ravish Kumar at prime time on NDTV India, wherein he brought in mime artists and brought in the context of that if we are not going to ask questions, if the journalists are not going to ask questions, make critical observations about coverage, live coverage, reportage of an incident or an event, who's going to do that? So from there, his journey in 2022 with NDTV came to an end when this particular channel, NDTV, was taken over by the corporate organization owned by Mr. Gautam Adani. Subsequently, a lot of journalists have resigned, and this is not just one channel story. Corporatization of media, concentration of power, business and economic power in the hands of few, as well as oligopoly in political economy of Indian media has had a serious and deep impact on the way editorial content and the news and advertising ratio is concerned as far as Indian news is concerned. And that has serious implications on the freedom of press as well. When we talk of freedom of press in India, contestations aside, we are slipping. We are at 161. Reporters Sans Borders report in 2023 puts us at 161. Now that gives us a lot of food for thought to talk about. Are there serious concerns with regards to the freedom of press in the country? Yes, there are. Some of the reasons when we talk about freedom of press can be in special relation to the women journalists. So we have to develop a gendered perspective as well. While corporatization of media, foxification of news, all of these are important concerns, but I also want to underline an important concern with regards to representation of women in newsrooms. When we look at one of the reports by NWMI published in 2017, led by Sonal Kellogg, tells us a grim story that most of the panels, Indian programming formats has a lot of panel discussions in the prime time slot from 8:30 to 11 every night. So in those 2.5, 3 hours, what we see is men debating, discussing, and critically examining every issue with very few women on the panel, on the news debates. The representation is marginal, very thin, but for issues related to women, they are hardly invited or called when the issues are economic, financial, corruption related, political, or defense related. So one of those issues is this underrepresentation or skewed or imbalanced representation of women in the newsroom, which is also then, creating an impact on how free is the press or not free is the press in the country. So this is one aspect which I wanted to underline here. Besides that, another thing which has happened is, the TRP, the television rating points being manipulated. One such scam which came forward was in 2020 when Republic TV or many other television channels, including news channels, were accused of manipulating the television, viewership data in order to put out themselves as the number one channel. And subsequently, then they are able to shape public opinion and influence the editorial content in a bandwagon effect for many other organizations as well. So this is also something which is impacting the freedom of press, how then press looks at its editorial policy, how the content or issue salience is established or prioritized in the newsrooms in India, especially in the last 1 decade. Not just data rigging. Another aspect which I want to highlight is the internet-led misinformation and disinformation. What has happened of late is most of the political leaders, they like to directly interact with public through the internet. They're using internet to directly interact and hence sidelining the role of the media. And that ways, the principal function of media as a watchdog, as a surveyor of environment, and then playing a subsequent role in shaping the public opinion is being compromised. Because a lot of misinformation, manipulation, propaganda, and disinformation can be spread by individual politicians, businessmen, political organizations, and such in such a rabid manner that amplification of that kind of views or noise, is put out as news. and those whole news news as a proposition is being mythified in the country. Besides that, another thing I would like to highlight is the political pressures. In the last, no, political pressures are not new. They're not even restricted to one particular state. India is a large country with many geographical, regional, and religious identities. We witness these political pressures, especially in the context of the easiest thing to do. What they do is, when a particular media organization cannot be tamed, they would rather introduce advertising ban. They would stop giving governmental advertising to those channels, and the economic aspect of survival and sustainability of those media organizations then become a huge concern. So this is something which has to be underscored when we talk of freedom of press in the country. And of course, last not the least is the fear of isolation. Women journalists in particular, their safety, their harassment, trolling, threat, as well as their security concerns have intensified in the last 12 to 13 years. There are several instances where women journalists have struggled to do their job, they've been intimidated, and there are not enough forums and not even social concerns. I have hardly come across mainstream media covering women journalists issues of safety and security concerns, which then is directly interrelational with the freedom of press as a construct and as well as a practice. Some of the concerns are up there on the screen. Some of the journalists, while speaking to, to the lady's finger, were sharing their experiences. And some of these experiences are serious concerns in terms of how gendered the spaces are. And those concerns have been put out in terms of how work, just being a journalist, a woman journalist in the country, can be a risk to their lives, and intimidation, especially online trolling, online hate, harassment, and at times even sexual harassment at workplaces have been identified as some of the concerns expressed by women journalists in their experiential narratives. I would like to end with hope. There are challenges of corporatization, challenges of economic challenges of women experiences. But I would like to, at the moment, just flag hope in terms of the rise of the alternative media. DG Pub is an independent consortium of 11 such digital news media organizations, wherein their larger objective is to move away from the advertising driven revenue model of the legacy media, that is of the mainstream newspapers and television channels, and practice journalism in its true spirit of public interest, of critique, of critical appraisal, and building awareness and sensitization of the society. Over to you.
I would like to go with Professor Busra from Pakistan. Ma'am, would you like to share your insights regarding the topic today we have? Session is yours, ma'am. Are you audible?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm really delighted to be at this platform. Thank you very much, the organizers, and particularly Dr. Kulveen. It's so lovely to see you and also to hear you as always. And I'm looking forward to more presentations from the others. Well, as far as I am concerned, I really don't have a presentation as such, I mean, in the form of slides, but I was just wondering, I will share a few reflections with all of you. As I am invited here to talk a little bit about the Pakistani scene with reference to press freedom. I thought that of course, Pakistan, like many other developing countries, and particularly the South Asian countries, is going through a very turbulent time when it comes to their political, economic, and social affairs. So that way, we are at a very critical juncture. And we probably in our discussions, we can talk about it a little more. My presentation basically is with reference to first, I will be talking about the media scene in Pakistan, and then, of course, what is the ownership like? What are the pressures that are coming on the media? But at the same time, I would also like to talk about freedom of the press with reference to how do we understand this concept of democracy and freedom, and one of the ways through which we can move forward. So when I'm talking about Pakistani media, uh, um, basically before 2002, we only had state-owned media, that was Pakistan Television Corporation, and we also had radio. But uh, uh, it's very interesting that it was during a military dictatorship, during President Musharraf's time, that in the 2002, we had a boom of TV channels. And from 2002 till today, we have something like around 89 news channels. And we have, this is according to PEMRA, which was promulgated during, again, Musharraf's time. And the whole idea was to give license and also to monitor the content, which is very problematic. And at the same time, we have something like in Pakistan, according to APNS, we have something like 437 newspapers and around 209 radio stations. Having said that, I would like to basically focus channels of Pakistan are owned by sorry, 68% of the TV channels are owned by top 10 people. And Jung Group, which also is sort of known from the Geo TV, it has 1/3 ownership when it comes to media channels and also media newspapers. And so it's interesting that there is this concentration of media outlets, whether it is electronic or print media or even radio, that it is in the hands of the very few. And at the same time, it's also interesting to see that in Pakistan from 207, and this is according to Media Monitoring Report till 2019, the figure of journalists boomed from 2,000 to something like 25,000. But at the same time, in the last couple of years, there has also we've also witnessing a cut in the media practitioners' jobs, and something like 15 to 35% people have been asked to leave the TV channels and different TV channels, and also in the newspapers. And those who remained, their salaries were cut. Now, this is just a phenomena that I want to share with you with reference to Pakistan. But this basically is, I'm trying to show here is that though TV channels had a very big boom initially, but later on this boom sort of declined, and the credibility of these channels also, we started losing that, particularly with reference to TV talk show. And somehow the other, when we are talking about freedom of the press, or we are talking about the media, the TV talk shows sort of pop into our mind more quickly. And unfortunately, TV talk shows have been more on the confrontational model. And so initially it did gain popularity, and now because it is working on confrontational model, and because and then later on the credibility of the journalists and of the anchor persons also was put under a question mark, and that's how the credibility of the media has also reduced. Now, when we are talking about press freedom in the context of Pakistan, it's become very complicated and complex now. And I think it has also happened in the other parts of the world, that when you are talking about that, are you really talking about the freedom of the press for the good of the public, or you're talking about the freedom of the press for the commercial or economic benefit of the owners? and the political and economic interests of the owners and also of the media practitioners is questioned now. So when we are talking about freedom of the press, we really need to look into this context also. And unfortunately, in the media, the news, which was supposed to be objective, uh, is mixed with the opinions, and opinions are often a very biased and very prejudiced. So when there is this mashing of the news and the opinions, the whole question and a whole fight about the freedom of the press again becomes problematic for academics as well as for the public. And we have number of researchers which is also reflecting that the people are not now turning to these media outlets thinking that they will they will guide them. Yes, what is happening here is that these channels have become so politically oriented that one can actually say that this particular channel is for this particular party and the other one is for the other political party. So that way, when you're talking about the freedom of the press, you're again basically saying that is it really for the political parties that you are talking about, or is it for the economic interest? So this is a scene that is prevalent in Pakistan. Now, I was just thinking that this is just not in Pakistan, but also in other parts of the world. And we need to really look deeper into this whole concept of the role of media in democracy and how do we understand this whole concept of democracy. If we are understanding this concept of democracy as after 5 years, one just goes and gives vote to a certain political party with a certain manifesto and hoping that that manifesto will be implemented, and then things will become really good, and then your own role is finished. So that becomes, again, this is something that needs to be questioned, because democracy, it should not just be about giving votes. Democracy has to be redefined, that where every individual is continuously taking part in the building up of your country, which can start right from your neighbors, and then it can grow up to bigger institutions. So if it is just one-time vote, then definitely in this kind of democracy, the role of the media will be the way it is at the moment. If democracy is about just voting for political parties and then forgetting about your role, then definitely the role of the media will be the way it is. But if democracy is something about let's work, let's find each other's voices and integrate with each other's voices and create something together for the good of the society, for the good of every individual, then the role of the media and the whole concept of the freedom of the media or the press would be defined differently, where it will be more pluralistic, and it will be more involving, and it will not be confrontational all the time. And I do feel that when we are talking about media as a watchdog role only, we are just asking the media to play the role of a dog, which is basically barking at every red light or every instance, but it's not really making a difference. So we need to re-look into this whole concept of democracy, and then identify and then see what can be the role of the media in it. When it comes to media ownership, because it's something that is very close to me, is that we also have to go for more, and unfortunately PEMRA has not been able to do that, it gives license to only those bidders who have a lot of money, and it's not really going for public media option. And how media can become a more of a public sphere, like Mas had mentioned earlier, then things can be different. This is the way forward that I feel. But lastly, I would also like to sort of relook into this concept of freedom. And freedom should not just be that I am free to talk anything that I want to talk about. It should be basically, freedom is basically about making this conscious choice of how can we work together. And I'm talking about integration now, and I'm not talking about confrontation, and I'm not talking about compromising, and so I'm talking about integration. So freedom should basically be uh, this deep consciousness in every individual that he is free to make the choices where he can contribute and he can integrate with the other by listening to the other first, by making sure that the other's ideas are taken well, and then coming up with something together. So this is, and whatever I'm saying is basically in line with what I have been reading with Mary Parker Foley back in 1933, with what Allama Iqbal have said, and what C.R. Das have also been talking about. So when I went through their work of these three great scholars, and of course Rousseau also, I came up with this thing that we need to re-look into the relationship of the individual with the state, re-look into the concept of democracy and freedom, and then only we will be able to talk about the press freedom more positively, and in an angle where we are trying to protect the democracy. And from democracy, what I mean here is that involvement of everyone in the decision making and in the in the making of the society that we all live in. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Comprehensive and insightful perspective sharing from Pakistan. Now I'd like to request Mr. Ujjwal Acharya to share his perspective on the theme of today's discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Pandey. It's working. Thank you, Mr. Pandey. And after hearing India and Pakistan, I kind of feel like I'm more freer to speak on what I want to. But I would like to begin first with a praise to Manipal Institute of Communication, because it's not an easy time in India to organize something like this of a panel discussion with the title that we have, the state of press freedom in South Asia, and obviously inviting us from Nepal, especially someone from Pakistan, to talk about this issue. I'll just focus on the state of a state of press freedom in Nepal for right now. And I'd like to begin with what Professor Bushra had said, that democracy is not only about giving votes. It's also about how these votes are converted into the action. And I would just do a little bit of tweak to that and apply the same thing with the freedom. Freedom is not just about giving votes, it should translate into action. Why I'm saying that is because if you look into the constitution of Nepal, which was promulgated in 2015, you see that code-wise we have everything that is possible in a constitution to write. We have a preamble where we have the word complete press freedom, not only press freedom, but a complete press freedom. We have 3 articles in our fundamental rights. 2 of them you will find in most of the constitution: right to opinion and expression, and right to information. But we also have a 3rd fundamental right, which is right to communication, where it clearly is said that there will be no censorship, media is free, and communication is free. But that's it. That's there in the constitution, in the words. But when you look into the practice, you won't see the same thing. You won't see the same thing in the policies that we have, in the policies that are in the making. There are provisions that are contradictory to these constitutional wordings. So we have bills in our parliaments, for example, Media Council bill or the IT bill, which doesn't give any context to the word, context to the right that's written in the constitution. We have 750 plus local government, which all are either have implemented laws about media or are making the laws about media with the restrictive provisions that go contrary to the constitution. We have laws, something like Electronic Transaction Act, and we have directives such as online media operation directives, which all do not uh, do not do not fall in line with what we have in our constitution. So it's a situation in South Asia, or especially in Nepal, is always that what's written is just to show. It's not what we do, right? What our governments do or what our state do. Writing is just to probably to show to the world that okay, that's what we have. And when it comes to practice, nobody looks into those writings. When they are making laws, when they are drafting the laws, nobody look at the nitty gritty of these wordings and the principle behind these wording in the constitution, to kind of integrate that principles into the new policies. Having said that, uh, still Nepal is one of the freest country in the region. Also shown in the slide that Mr. Pandey has shown. After Bhutan is on 90, we are on 95. So still in the bottom half of 180 countries, but not as bad as in other countries in South Asia. So we are among the freest country, and given the uh, given the fact that Nepal, it's pretty easy to travel to Nepal. It's pretty easy to organize events in Nepal. It's pretty easy for people to speak there, come there, compared to Bhutan or any other countries. For the citizens of every other country, Nepal has been the last few years has been in the uh, has been the low key of any discussion regarding the freedoms and stuff. And we have scholars from India, scholars from Pakistan, all coming there together talking about the press freedom in their countries, in the region, and all they agree that it's where it's still the freest country in the region. But that doesn't mean that we have the best freedom practices. We have the all the freedom that we want under a democracy. And when you look from the perspective of the press freedom in Nepal, there are quite a bit of issues. That restricts the press freedom. That is again contrary to what the constitution says in terms of Nepal. So I'll just highlight some of those issues. Obviously, I have already talked about the restrictive policies and policies in the making. When you look at the policies that we have in the form of act or regulation or directives, or sometimes even just a letter from the state agencies, a lot of time there are state agencies overreaching their premises to control media. A very good example is when we had the election last year, and our election commission wrote to one of the leading online media in Nepal to remove a news about corruption, potential corruption by a son of a politician. And that made basically no sense. He was not even the candidate. The person who was in position was not even the candidate in the election. And election commission uh, directing a media outlet to remove a news, it's something very unethical, and it's a overreaching to control the media. Of course, there was a huge outcry, and the election commission withdrew that directive. But it basically shows this is just one of the example where our state agencies are trying to jump over from their premises to kind of exert control on our media outlets or the media agencies. And then we have a problem of this political affiliations of the media, political affiliations of the journalists. Uh, as it was highlighted yesterday and in discussions, uh, presentations from our friends, that most of the journalists are associated with one or other journalist association that are directly affiliated with the political parties. And a lot of media, we come from a history of media where media started as a political campaigning tool. So that history is still there. And because of that history, we still have a lot of partisan media in our country. Another that is a very recent trend and a very concerning one. One is the non-stop negative narration against media and journalists. For an example, when our former deputy prime minister and the home minister was forced to resign following a case in the court, Supreme Court, uh, in the issue that was first established by one of the media. The first thing he did was to attack the media, saying that all the media are campaigning against me. And he actually named some of the media, some of the editors. It was a very personal attack on the media and journalists, even though he knew that the case that was on the Supreme Court was actually broken by a news media. And the editor who broke this news, who continuously followed this news uh, until the end, he experienced the level of online harassment, the level of online trolling, and if you look at the words that was directed to him, it is for a person like for a normal person like me. I don't think I would have come out of all that trolling, all that online harassment without a very big psychological trauma. So still now he is being harassed on the online space. Still he is being trolled. So any news he publishes, they just go on like sending uh, hundreds of hatred messages to him just because he broke a news of a head of a popular political party. And the other side of this story is the corporate and advertisers' influence on media content. Obviously, what Kulvin said is that the falsification. Obviously, that's there in our media as well. I'll just give a couple of examples. One example is obviously with this same case. This news outlet which broke this news and followed it uh, is just a small online news portal with less than a dozen journalists, and it's actually it didn't have that much of influence before it broke the news until the case was registered to the court, until the investigation was initiated by the police. No other mainstream media for weeks, at least 4 to 5 weeks, no other online media wrote anything about this politician or the case that it has read. Once the police started investigating, once the case went into the court, then the mainstream media started writing about it. And obviously, there is another case relating to a multinational company, Coca-Cola. One journalist who is differently able on a wheelchair, he continuously pursued a case of tax invasion by Coca-Cola in Nepal. No other mainstream media covered that issue until Coca-Cola was forced to issue an statement saying that they will pay the tax. So there is this corporate or advertisers influence on the media content there, which is also undermining the press freedom in the country. And obviously there is physical and psychological violence against journalists, which is across the region. And as Kulvin said, it's more so on a female journalist. If you are a female journalist, it's more likely that you will face this kind of psychological violence, at least psychological violence, online harassment, and reports say that around more than 4 in 5 female journalists in Nepal face some kind of online harassment. 2 more points. And one other point is, of course, about the misinformation, which is obviously a threat to the public trust in media. And most of the time, the politicians or a lot of people use a term called fake news, which by the use of term itself undermine the public trust on media. If it is a news, I was a journalist for a long time, so I tend to believe that if it is a news, it doesn't need any qualifier. If we say news is already a verified piece of fact. It's a contextualized, it's a verified. So when you say fake news, it basically is demeaning journalism. So they are using a term fake news when people even say just these 2 words without saying any further word, they are already undermining the media, the public trust on the media. So it has become a big issue around press freedom. Obviously, all the pointed that Kulvin highlighted about how politicians are using, I think you yeah, how their politicians are using their social media, how they are trying to undermine media with the misinformation is a big threat there. And one last final point is that among all this, why journalists are not fighting back, why it is difficult for journalists in Nepal to fight back is because journalists are not paid. Even in the mainstream media, in the top newspapers, there are constantly people are coming out saying that they have not paid for months. Even our number one media houses during the COVID time didn't pay all the journalists. They didn't actually go by the laws that we have. And in other mainstream media also, there are journalists who haven't paid for the month. So if you are not paid for a month, I don't think we can expect them to kind of like do the work with that dedication to kind of like uh, sustain the press freedom or to fight the press freedom. Obviously, we are doing a very good job if we look at these ways issue versus how our media are performing. It's a uh, big question as well, and journalists have done really good work on that. But the issue is still there, and it's still impacting how we look at the press freedom in our country. Thank you very much.
Comprehensive and very to the point, insight sharing. Now we three panelists, we have three panelists who shared their country perspective as well as in the context of South Asia. Now we have final country perspective sharing round, and he's Dr. Bhanu is going to share not the country perspective but the perspective of South Asia as a whole. And I would also like to hear from him that since he is a media scholar and media commentator for a long time, he has a wide range of experiences of North American press as well as South Asian press. So I would like to hear from him a wider perspective in the context of South Asia and the global scenario. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Professor Leknath Pandey, for this opportunity and this panel. And we are happy, and as every panelist was saying, we appreciate the Manipal Institute of Communication and Professor Dr. Padmarani for creating this kind of venue where we can share our difficult ideas about press freedom. In South Asian context, let me go around the South Asia a bit, and then I'll try to link it with the North American context. So in South Asia, we share some common threats and challenges. For example, big countries like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, big countries in the terms of the population. And small countries like Sri Lanka, even Afghanistan also, I don't know what's the population, but this is also in the category of the small population, a small country. And Maldives, Bhutan, they have a little different kind of trend. In the big country, however, whether big or small, because we share geography, we share some kind of cultural affinity. And then not only that, we share the press freedom challenges too. For example, states are quite hostile and they try to use media as a tool rather than as the part of the a tool for the voice of the voiceless. And governments are very much interested to use those media for their purpose, as the governments are trying to be more public relations state, and they're trying to use media so that they can directly reach the public rather than in these days, for example, not just in South Asia and everywhere, including North America, they're trying to bypass the mainstream media and going through the social media and other approaches so that they can really connect to the public, and trying to bypass media because media has this watchdogging role and critical role, and that might be unpleasant to the government. The political parties also have their own interest to use media as a tool. Corporate, they also definitely do have because they are investing a lot of money. For example, Mr. Ujjwal was referring to a case of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola being a multinational company, and when they have to pay a huge sum of the government tax when they are trying to hand over the ownership from one company to another, and they try to evade this kind of tax. And every media in Nepal, it was known to everyone, but nobody was saying because Coca-Cola was investing a lot on the advertisement and they are getting a lucrative money. And because of that, nobody was saying Coca-Cola is evading tax and then this is for the national interest. So corporate interests also are there and they're trying to manipulate media because they're spending money on that. And safety of journalism issue is also there. And in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh is more problematic than other small countries. And sustainability issue everywhere, including North America as well as in South Asia, because we don't have a very sustainable model when we are going to a digital platform and how we are generating revenue. In North American case, that is almost solved because they're trying to reach the subscribers and paying, and their paywall is quite easy, and everybody has the access to MasterCard, Visa, whatever, and they can immediately do that. And then even newspapers are cheaper and subscriber higher. For example, the New York Times has more than 75 million subscribers. That is far more than their the physical paper subscribers, and this is more profitable than they were before. So the CBC and others also they're doing that, but in Canada's case, that is not so much successful like in America because Canada has a limited population like 380,000 something. Yes, 38 million, I mean. And sustainability issue, failed business model, and that is a challenge too. We share the challenge in South Asia and combating fake news, as Ujjwal said, and even Kulveen also was highlighting on that. Fake news, propaganda, disinformation. This is a common problem across the world, North America, South Asia, all things. And media is a shield for doing something against public interest. So the traditional media are used most as the shield that they want to gain more power and work for the political and corporate interests, and they just disregard the public interest, but they say still they're saying that we are the part of the voice of the voiceless. Interesting thing, I try to collect the, can move the slide to the next. I try to collect the press freedom index from Reporters Frontiers of the last 20 years. And what I found is something very interesting because in 2001 or 2, where press freedom started, for example, we can see, let me check here as well. So, for example, in the beginning, look at in the slide, maybe I think my audience also, they are seeing this kind of slide. In 2002, Bhutan was the lowest. And second lowest was Nepal, because Nepal was suffering from conflict. And third lowest was the Bangladesh. And then there were, for example, India was the highest. In India is the 80th. Sri Lanka is the highest. India second highest. India around 50, and India around 80, and Sri Lanka is around 50. So they were highest 20 years ago, and now after 20 years, it's everything upside down. So it's a serious thing now we have to review. Just go back 20 years and then see how these are fluctuating. Interesting thing about India is in 2002, there was BJP government. And now again, BJP government. So political party is not the cause. Cause is the interest of the leaders, what they want and how they want to handle it. So in Nepal, even though we, as Ujjwal mentioned that complete press freedom in the preamble of the constitution, that is non-editable even if there is 2/3 majority of the parliamentarians. But we don't have that because they just put those words to please journalists during that time so that they can pass the constitution as soon as possible. But the way they are trying to tackle with other kind of strategy, and in each government they are trying to see how they can control media and want to go there. And this is everywhere. And we cannot talk much about Afghanistan after the takeover of Taliban rulers because everything is almost crystal clear. And as Ujjwal said, and as Siddhartha Bardharaj in very recent discussion in Nepal, in the Himalaya Media Mela, who was saying Nepal is the freest state to express all kind of things because there are some level of tolerance we have. So we tolerate the criticism, and we don't think that immediately we want to set up somebody's mouth. So this kind of thing is there, and but always India is a very big thing for anybody in South Asia, especially in Canada. Also, we have a huge influence of India because there's so many examples we keep discussing about India in the past. India important for everyone because it's the largest democracy and it's being the hugest population, maybe within 2 months, or it is already, I don't know. So whatever India does, and that can be an example for Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and then especially if India does something good, that may not be the example. If India does something bad, that can be the example for everyone. And they just want to mold that, and they try to use the same thing. Oh, India has this kind of example, so why don't we can control media or bypass the traditional media or something, or we can cut the revenues of the media, something. These kind of things are there. I'm going a bit quicker because of the we don't have much time. There is another slide. You can see the slide. And now I'm coming from the South Asian perspective, from the global. It's not our only problem. It's the global problem. You can see 26 countries in 2013. They were the very good situation countries. Now we have just 8 countries. So even United States is falling behind. Even United Kingdom is falling behind. European states also are falling behind because of this internet thing. The traditional standards, the way that we were thinking press freedom, they are trying to review that. And Professor Busra was saying what is press freedom and how to perceive that. So now we are again coming back and criticizing, evaluating, thinking based on the new kind of technology, new kind of situation. There is not just digital divide. Digital divide also is affecting press freedom, but we have the artificial intelligence now, and you can see one country, the whole world is moving in press freedom. Can you go to the next slide? Yes. So in an ideal situation, in every country, India, Nepal, Canada, USA, Europe, there should be a media criticism because media has the role of the watchdog. And then based on the media criticism, and media wants government agencies be accountable to their roles. And based on that, there is a good governance, and media is a part of that, because so that media is supposed to be a player, one of the 4 pillars of democracy. But it's not happening. It's just going opposite. Now government is controlling media. Government is making media accountable rather to their writing, and so that it means if there's something unpleasant published in media and government wants to control that, and as Ujjwal was mentioning, the election commission was writing a letter to one news portal asking, oh, remove this news. In that country where complete full press freedom is there. So it's a big mockery itself. Can you go to the next? And yes, here this is a framework, media accountability framework. So it applies everywhere. And this is proposed by Van Krog, and he was a Swedish guy, and he did a PhD in 2012, and he developed this frame. So you can see there is one media technology, one context, and media system, another context. For example, authoritarian Soviet communist or libertarian or social responsibility media system, and technology or newspapers or radio or television, online, and now maybe we are coming to the AI, right? And then how media should be accountable. In ideal situation, media should be accountable to a professional framing, code of ethics, and the values of professional excellence we have to maintain. And we should constantly connect it to the public frame, because public interest is very much important. But we do not just follow the public frame, because public are also sometimes motivated to something else, and that can be against the ethical standards. Can you press one more? Yes. So in ideal situation, professional frame and public frame should work together, and media should be accountable to those parts. Accountability framework. But can you press another? So, however, the reality is media is more engaged with the political frame because the government also wants to be a public relation government and they want to be populist. They say something, they do something different. And this is happening more in the least developed countries. And political frame, media wants to please the politicians and get benefits of that. And media wants to please the market interest and get the benefits of that. And they disregard the professional and public frame. So this is how most of the developing countries and especially the least developing countries are suffering. So this is what I just want to say. I think my 7 minutes is gone. Still, I do have time. Okay, thank you.
Your comprehensive, insight sharing and also, presenting the model of, how media is engaging and being a tool, actually not being a voice of the voiceless. Thank you. Now we have completed the first round and I think we have already, covered half of the time. So I think we have limited time to dive into this discussion round. So I would like to, go to the question and answer session among the panelists and discussion session. So all of you presented that, media, freedom issues is being questioned in South Asia. And there are multiple reasons, but, but I'm wondering, all of South Asian countries are, except Afghanistan, we are a democracy. And we have been democracy for last several decades or few decades. But we are consistently being figured within the lower bottom, half or, bottom quarter of the old press freedom index. We can question the very modality of, index, but it is a universal index and we have been being figured. Why is so being happened in every country? I would go first with the Dr. Colvin.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey. That's a very important question. Yes, of course, the irony remains that while all of these countries which we've spoken about today are democracies, but you must understand that in many ways, these are fledgling democracies. And also, like Professor Rahman said, it's about whether people, the populations in the country, in these low and middle income countries, they configure the essence of democracy and whether they understand and underscore the need for participative democracy beyond just contributing through votes on a given day, and what all entails in a democracy. And that is where also, these are also countries which are on course to development, especially economic growth and opening up of economies, globalization, liberalization of taxes, integration of world economies led to consumerism, led to materialism and a path of economic progress and corporatization, which then affected media severely. While on one side, proliferation of news media in terms of print and electronic expansion happened in countries like India, but on the other side, corporatization of media led to hostile takeovers, and then the imprint it left on the content and the editorial matters has been a concern. So while these are democracies, but the literacy of democracy amidst people needs to be spread more.
Yes, as you said, if you look at South Asia region, with the exception of Afghanistan now, we all are in the democracy. But democracy have many faces. Democracy have, by just terming that we are in the democracy, it doesn't translate into the democracy. And the issues that the very basic look, if you look on a very basic term at the, especially at the murder of the journalist, South Asia is actually the region where there is no war, but still the number of journalists murdered every year is very, very high. And in a lot of time, all these murderers, they go away with the murder. They are not punished. right? So if you look at the law situation, like how laws are implemented, how the system is implemented, it's a questionable situation. Whether we are just merely having election every 5 years, merely asking people to vote every 5 years, doesn't translate into the democracy. And one of the big reasons that impacts our journalism is possibly also to do with the literacy of the people. It's not only about the literacy where they know how to read and write, it's also about the literacy around journalism, around information, around what democracy is, right? So if obviously it's when we say press freedom, a lot of time it's misunderstood as the right of the media and the journalist. But actually press freedom is not the right of the journalist. It's not exclusive to media and it's not exclusive to the journalist. It's the fundamental right that every citizen have, and press freedom actually drive from these rights. But we have developed this habit because of we are not very literate about democracy, how democracy functions. And obviously the point that Dr. Acharya raised is about why the subsystem model is working in the West, but not working in our region. One of the reasons is media in our region was never sold at the price where it will make profit on itself, right? Today, if I have to buy a newspaper, I pay how much? 10 rupees, 5 rupees, something like that, which is not even the cost. You can actually, if you buy a newspaper like Times of India, which is quite big, you can actually at the end of the month you can sell that newspaper to the waste collector at a profit, right? So we are used to buying these. We are basically we take the journalism product as a freebies, and when we have this habit of taking freebies, it's not like a new habit. It's age-old problem. And at one point in every other country, there in its history, there was points when media were very partition press. During the independence in India, during the Panchayat rule in Nepal, that media was the tool for the politicians, tool for advocacy, tool to bring freedoms to these countries. And that particular point of time actually guided where we are now. So if you look into all these contexts, the press freedom situation in these all countries, what I'd like to compare is it's like a bucket with many holes. Unless you kind of like patch up all the holes at once and try to just look into one hole or a couple of holes or maybe like 5 holes and try to patch up these holes, the water will still spill over from other holes, and nobody is looking at it as a whole package where you have to patch up this bucket as a whole to ensure there is a complete press freedom. Thank you. Your perspective. How can because the media is discussing the very Donald Trump, but they do not take the side of Donald Trump. Yeah. So my question to you is, can media broad and signal the very interest of policy leaders and political parties like the government plans meaning publicly defend the media, inside the media, but you become able to display these media question on it. So, what is the practice of the media as well as to say this very important?
No, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I'm so sorry. Somehow something has happened.
Not
This question to whom? This question to Professor Busra, question to me, whom you are asking?
I'm asking to you, Dr. Manu.
Okay. Thank you very much for this question. This is not easy question though, because now we are in a very serious technological transition from traditional media to digital media, and digital media in specifically social media, and social media to artificial intelligence and chatbots. And this way, I mean, there is a massive transition going on. So when there are the technological transition, and then professionals, the traditional setup, traditional values are under question. And the advantage of this is taken by the previous President Donald Trump, and so that he completely bypassed the traditional media and tried to use Twitter and some other social media account. So right now, there are so many discussions how to handle those things, how to transcend the journalistic values across different platforms. But there are no single fix. People are experimenting in a different way in different countries. In very developed countries, they are thinking in a different way how that can cope in their particular context. And the same formula doesn't work in South Asian context because we have a different scenario, socioeconomic interest. And here we think, for example, if we bring a case of Nepal or India, for example, thousands of journalists there, thousands of news media. And the General Secretary of Nepal's Federation of Journalists, he was saying there are around 20,000 media in Nepal, including all news portals. So when 20,000 media is there, still the government is successful bringing some kind of draconian laws to control that, and that is already against the complete press freedom type of narrative that is already in the constitution. So the same thing is happening. How many journalists are here in India? Hundreds of thousands journalists are there. But why difference is not happening? Because on the one hand, we are in the tradition. On the other hand, we are already habitual that we want to please the politician, we want to please the corporate people, and so that we are trying to run our business. If we think this is not our business, we are in the business of the public interest and going for the voice of the voiceless people, then we don't care of that. But we need to sustain, we need to grow, we need to access a huge whole South Asian market. So these infrastructure that needs money, and money comes from corporate interest. Corporate interest is happy when you have some connection to the political interest. So this is a social, socio-economic setup, and this is a bit difficult. And we don't have easy fix, and we nobody can rightly answers, but we can experiment some different models.
Thank you. Now, am I audible, Professor Busa? Hello?
Yeah, yes, very clear.
Okay, earlier while sharing the country perspective, you mentioned that the Pakistani press are, ideologically divided. So my follow-up question to you is Pakistani media upholding the democracy? Are they truly fulfilling the responsibility that comes with press freedom? I would like to, get your further perspective on that.
You see, to begin with, I basically would like to sort of first talk about, with reference to your first question. I missed your second question, and then I'll come to the question that you've just asked. You see, the thing is, when you're talking about democracy in all these South Asian countries, and yet failing when it comes to actually it seems like when it comes to the role of the media particularly. So my proposition is that we need to redefine this whole concept of democracy also. If we are thinking about democracy only within this context that there are two or more than two political parties, after every 5 years, they're going to get up and they're going to tell you what is right for you. And then you decide, okay, this party A seems to be in line with your thought, or party B is, then this will never work. And I personally feel that democracy has to come from a national organization perspective, where all the people are involved, and then how the people together themselves find out what do they really want, and then how it can be translated into reality. So if political parties are coming from this angle that we are all know all, and we are going to tell you what is good for you, then that is problematic. And if you look into, I mean, if you look into the general scene also, apart from England or UK, nowhere parliamentary democracy has been a success. So we need to relook into this whole concept of democracy. And even in America, this democracy and the freedom of press at the moment is going through crisis. So maybe yes, at a certain point in time, uh, we thought that they are achieving something, but maybe they were not really achieving things. And there is very strong critic on the role of the media and the way democracy works there. And if you look into what is it, Washington, he even said it, that we should not have multi-party system also. And he also spoke about one party. So what I'm basically trying to say here is that we need to understand democracy from this concept, that people with all their different ideas and views come together, give respect to each other's ideas, and then work for a common idea. And if we are going to keep on insisting that I'm right and you are absolutely wrong and I'm absolutely right, this is what is happening in our political talk shows, this is what is happening in our political discourse, media will never be able to ultimately do good for the people. And we also need to understand this whole concept of press freedom. It is basically not an end, it's a means to an end. And what is the end? End of the day, we need to think about the poor, the poverty. How can we elevate the poverty? How can we rid the poverty? We need to think about this culture of fear. How do we get rid of the fear? So we need to relook into our actual objectives that we want from democracy and from press freedom. It should just not be freedom for the sake of freedom. It should not be democracy for the sake of democracy. It has to have, we need to be more clear about what do we really want from democracy and what is democracy. And I'm repeating myself that it is equal participation, giving respect to everyone's opinion, and then integration. Now, coming to Pakistan, of course, Pakistan also faces the same problem that the other distinguished panelists have identified. And I was quite in the sense that I felt very connected to all the other speakers also in this context, that we all are facing the same problem and we are all more or less on the same page in that reference, and we all are identifying the same problems, and we are all kind of in pain because the way situation is. And as the other panelists have said, because of this capitalism and corporation and economic interest, when we are talking about press freedom, we have a problem here. So that is there, and we all are concerned what is the way forward. And it should not just be talk for the sake of talk. It has to be re-educating and relearning ourselves about this role of media in democracy. So, of course, Pakistan has also failed when it comes to the role of media in trying to improve the lives of the people. And it seems to have become a spokesperson of the few powerful and meeting their vested interests.
Thank you. Now, I would like to go for another question, and it is a common question, but I'm not sure who is speaking on this. But everybody, while talking earlier in the panel, was saying that there is an issue of labor issues, there is a commercial interest, and its reflection in media content and a political influence. It is also directly or indirectly related to the economic issue and the interest of the media. So economic sustainability is the core, is in the core to sustain in the business as well as maintain editorial independence. But one of the major challenges of the media industry facing today is economic pressure. Digital platform is there, especially social media are literally taking away the commercials and ad revenues of so-called legacy media, or we may say traditional media. So what would be the answer to this kind of phenomena, and what is your I would go first further with the Dr. Colvin. What is your country's media ecosystem is doing to address this challenges? I mean, not from the government side, but individual side, media organization side, what is the solution to it? How they are, bridging, maintaining the source of revenue as well as, gaining the public trust or addressing the issues of public, or they are just, wondering how to, guess the, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an important question in the context of India because on one side we have the legacy media, that is the mainstream media, which at times is yielding to the political pressures, which is facing issues of sustainability with its ad-driven revenue model. And on the other side, like you pointed out, post-pandemic especially, there has been a phenomenal rise in the digital news, organizations. In the number of digital news organizations, there is a shift towards alternative media as well, wherein the voiceless people at the margins, they've started to initiate, organizations or startups. New startups have come up so that they can relay their own news, disseminate their own news. So India, being a very diverse and plural country, requires coexistence of all kinds of media. It requires the digital news organizations, the new ecology. It requires the mainstream media to come back and relook at its economic models to create sustainability. Some of you have already talked about the need to make people literate about subscription driven models. So India as a country needs to understand, the population of India also needs to understand that if you want good journalism, if you want free press, if you want credible sources, if you want trust in the news, uh, you know, back in the newsroom, you will have to pay for news as well. So the idea of journalism is free is something which needs to be relooked at for the legacy media to come back and play a role in public interest. For the digital news startups, of course, there are regulations which are being considered, but they need to collaborate. They need to collaborate with the mainstream media to build a robust mechanism of this free and fair unpartisan coverage which we are all trying to desire. And on the other hand, let the alternative media grow, let them tell their own stories. People, this is a huge country, people from different parts of the country need to tell their stories. So this, the rise of the alternative media is the bright side. So all of this needs to come together in order to create a sustainable environment for news organizations for the future.
Thank you for the same question. So I have some perspective, like even though we don't have any financial successful models and no country is successful yet, uh, especially in the developing countries like India, Nepal, or South Asia, we need to have some kind of cooperative media. So, for example, there are so many news outlets and they are creating the duplicate news of the same thing. So they are feeding the same thing. If you Google one particular news, exactly the same news is published in different online or other traditional media. So what we should do now is we have to study the market. How many people, what kind of news outlet is already there, and why, how not we do duplicate another same repeat things, rather than we try to engage more people in one corporate media, one newsroom, more people, because these days journalism is not a teamwork now. It's an individual work, individual interest work. Everybody wants to be editor. So from this point, we have to go back again in our traditional setup that journalism is a teamwork for the authenticity, for combating disinformation, combating fake news. We need to have a teamwork, editorial gatekeeping system must be there so that we can have a very filtered news. Instead, for example, why we need cooperative media? We need to have some fact-checking wing as well these days based on the need of the society. So fact-checking wing and the gatekeeping mechanism and our own reporters, our own coverage area, and how we are different than other news portals. Maybe we are focusing more on agriculture or focusing more on jobs, focusing more on what kind of news. So everybody should not follow the political news. Prime Minister is doing this and that and that and repeating that. So we have to think back again. So many journalists, no impact. Why? Because we all are repeating the same thing. Instead, we come back and try to work in a team. This is how the solution can be.
Sorry, but I am not going to repeat the same question. I am going to ask another question, but based on your previous presentation. While saying earlier, you say that social media are becoming a fertile platform for propaganda, fake news, and disinformation. I know it is one of your area of research. And on the other hand, you also said that the government agency, political parties, and even corporate groups are discrediting the media. In such scenario, how can media continue to uphold credibility, independence, and be the voice of the people?
I had a very nice answer to your earlier question. My answer would probably have been, if I knew the sustainability model for the media right now, I would already have been a millionaire, because everywhere around the world, media houses wanted that formula to be sustainable. No, but obviously one answer to that is that the funding has to come from the audience. There is no alternative to that. The funding has to come from the audience. And going to your second question, obviously, in the scenario of India or Nepal or anywhere in the world, is that there are, I wouldn't say mass media either, but there are alternative platforms that are rising, right? In the context of Nepal, there are local Facebook groups which are disseminating information quicker than the media, right? So in this context, it's not there is no easy fix for the journalism. There is no easy fix for the journalism. But as Panu said, the only good thing for the journalism is good journalism. That's an age-old formula. When journalism started for the good of the people. And I always say that good journalism is good for journalism. So until we go back to this basic formula, until we go back, I don't know, like maybe 100 years, to look into how journalism were done at that time, how the content were produced, how rigorous was the content, how the editorial independence work at that time, how media looked at business, how media looked at the society, how media looked at journalists, until we go back to this and learn from this, because this is not a new problem brought about by the internet. We have to see that the sustainability thing, when it comes to we talk about all the problems in the media, obviously there is a big role played by the internet, but it's not brought about by the internet. Internet is just a mean in which these problems that initiated in 80s, in 70s, country-wise different. Probably it was in 80s or 90s in India. Probably it was a little late in Nepal. But media went a wrong way long before internet or social media platform exposed that weaknesses in the media. So unless we go back to the point where media started undermining press freedom, media started undermining democracy, media started undermining the role of media, and restart from that point, I don't think there is an easy fix to the problem that you just said.
And that media is itself a problem, not a scapegoat. Okay, that's quite nice perspective. But we have feedback from the audience, and they are not getting us properly, and they want to ask questions. So I think Professor Busra, I'll come to you later on. But now, shall we begin the question answer session? Okay, I would like to ask the eminent and distinguished audience to ask question, and you also can share your comments regarding the prospective our distinguished panelists shared. For question, I would like to ask you to limit your question within a minute, and for the comment, try to be conclude your question within the 2 minutes. Thank you.
Can I ask? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Good
we can.
afternoon. Yeah, this is a question specifically to Professor Bushra, right? Bushra Hamid from Pakistan. So I was very interested in her perspective about the freedom of the press in Pakistan, especially freedom of the media. I wanted to ask her whether there has been some effort to see a correlation between the kind of leaders that Pakistan has had, and specifically, like for example, Pakistan has had presidents and prime ministers. So whether there is a difference in the way that the freedom of the press differs depending on whether presidents like Musharraf or we had I think Zardari, etc., or prime ministers like Imran Khan or Nawaz Sharif, when they were in power, whether the media had less or more power, or there is a correlation between these kinds of political leaders.
Thank you very much for asking this question. You see, you can broadly speaking divide the country into democratic and authoritarian regimes. And if you're wanting me to sort of comment that was there a difference between between the regimes when it comes to the press freedom? Well, when it was, if you start before President Ayub Khan, we had complete freedom. But then when President Ayub came, who was a military dictator, we had NPT and we had a controlled media there. Then we had democratic regimes, that is during Bhutto and then People's Party and then Nawaz Sharif. It is interesting to see that apparently, yes, they were free, but at the same time, you do see a lot of oppression towards the journalists. And you have books like Press in Chains by Sami Niazi, which is very which is an eye opener for us, that how even during political regimes, though we had press freedom, but we did have oppression and we did have journalists were under a strict scrutiny. And then afterwards we had General Zia, where there was of course we had to say a lot of things between the lines, but as such there was no overt oppression, but there was definitely a covert one. But afterwards, what has happened, apparently, again, we've had democracies, but somehow or the other, they have been controlled. Even during Imran Khan's regime, we had a very controlled media environment. And even now, it is worse scenario which we are witnessing now. Interestingly, during Musharraf's time, in the beginning of his tenure, things were very open and he did let all the media outlets, he did give them a lot of freedom. But somehow or the other, I think that freedom, I don't know why, but that freedom is basically just translated into political statements. And it's about he said and she said, and then how that freedom was misused in creating more divisions and more hatred. And somehow or the other, our media had become more of a hate speech. So in the name of freedom of speech, we witness more confrontations. And it's not that I am defending Musharraf's stance that later on PEMRA, which was supposed to just give license to the channels, but it became more controlling body. So I don't know whether how much should we blame the media outlets themselves for bringing this kind of oppression on themselves. So this is the problem. And nowadays, so I have no comments. Things are really bad.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question. I think it is better to take a couple of questions from the floor and then answer the question so that we can accommodate more questions at one round.
Good afternoon. I'm Neeti Apte. My question is to Dr. Purvi, and it relates to alternative media. And I'm just curious, is alternative media a solution to the various problems faced by mainstream media? And secondly, in regards to freedom of media, is alternative media freer than mainstream?
Yeah. So in response to your question, I must say No, there is no such thing as replacement. Alternative media cannot replace the mainstream for the reason that the sheer numbers we need to cater to. It's a large country, so we need both. There is a requirement for coexistence of mainstream as well as trying to strengthen the alternative media. Why is alternative media hope for all of us? Is because they're providing voice to the people on the margins. People are able to tell their own stories. So we need to strengthen the alternative media, but we cannot replace the mainstream. The need for mainstream media to relook at themselves and reconceptualize with values with core values like trust and trust, more news than noise, has to be reestablished. So coexistence of alternative, of mainstream, of the digital news ecology, all of it is required for this plural and diverse country like ours. No one media can solve our problems.
Thank you. But I have a small follow-up question on that. What is the prospect of alternative, so-called alternative media being a mainstream media in the long run?
Well, there can be a possibility, but then again, viability, financial viability of the alternative media, and how do they generate sources? At the moment, they're largely crowd-funded. So how far can that model be sustainable to create the larger infrastructure which a big broadcast organization or a news organization requires will be interesting to see. And of course, the kind of advertising revenue which they're able to generate at the moment is not compatible with the requirements of the broadcast organization at the moment. So what we need at the moment is collaborative environments. Professor Bhanu spoken about cooperative media. What we need is collaboration, cooperation, and coexistence in a country like ours at the moment.
Anybody want to ask? Other panelists as well.
I have two questions. First is to Professor Bushara. What is the status of women journalists in Pakistan? And the second question is to Professor Bhanu. Journalism has constantly adapted to technological transitions. So, somewhere we are losing the basic objective journalism. So what is your take on that? How can we revive basic objective journalism that we read in masses in our textbooks?
May I answer first? May I answer first?
Yeah.
Okay. You see, when it comes to women journalists, we have to see when you're talking about journalists as reporters, as actual journalists. Yes, we have very few female journalists who work as reporters and who are also in the editorial board. But wherever they are, of course, there is discrimination also, but they are playing their role quite effectively. So though they are fewer in number, their role is quite effective that way. But when it comes to electronic media, we have number of female anchor persons and opinion journal media practitioners, and they are really well heard, and they do carry a lot of weight also. So we have journalists like Naseem Zehra, who was first a journalist and now she's an anchor person. So she does have a weight whenever she's talking. So it's not, so they are, if you're talking with reference to, I would not say that I never like to compare women with men, but I like to say that they are playing their role as a journalist, a very responsible role when it comes to these positions. When it comes to your second question, you see, the thing is, objectivity is definitely a myth. So if you're trying to see that media will sort of give objective news, that is a mistake. But then also we need to redefine into this whole concept of truth, where I feel that truth is just not what you are seeing. Truth is basically when you are trying to look into what is apparent, trying to go underneath what is apparent. So if you're just going to say that, tomatoes have become expensive and that is the news and everybody is suffering because of the price hike, that's not really a news. Journalism is a good journalism, as been rightly pointed out, is basically trying to show what is beneath what is apparent, what have been the reasons. So somehow the other, we are not really looking for truth. And again, objective journalism is also not that Mr. A said that and Mr. B said this. And so that is it. And if you look into particularly our Urdu journalism, most of the news, in fact, 99% of the news is he said this at that occasion and he said that on that occasion. So this is how the journalism has been reduced to, which is very, very sad scenario. And I think it's the same in the other South Asian countries.
All right. Okay. So the second question is more focused on me. So journalistic values are always challenged when there is a new technology arrives. For example, what we have almost around 500 years old history with the print newspapers. When radio was introduced in 1920s, then so many other journalists, those who were in the traditional news media, they questioned about the credibility and question about how the journalistic standards were maintained in radio. When television came, same question. When the satellite and other kind of system and internet came, same question. When social media is coming, more question, because they are also taking the revenues. And when AI is coming and we are discussing how we are trying to embed AI in everyday journalism to cope with the sustainability issue. So when there is a massive technological transition starting from 90s to now, then definitely these values are also under so many questions they face. So when we have a little slower time and we have some kind of tradition we built within, then we can create, okay, these values can work in this way. There are so many scholars, they think journalistic values, they transcend from the technological platform, but every technology has their own strength and own weakness, so that we have to make sure that these strengths, what are these strengths and weaknesses, and how we have to preserve those values. So this is the phase of learning. Everybody is experimenting, everybody is learning in Canada, in USA, in Western Europe, in South Asia. We all are experimenting in a way. And for example, nobody has found the sustainability model. So in the case, nobody has found a perfect model how these traditional journalistic values are transcending to the next platform. And so everybody is experimenting. Let's wait and experiment ourselves and figure out how we can move forward for a better solution. There is no solution now, but hopefully we will have it. Thank you.
Invitations. Now I think we can add just only a couple of more questions. So
yes. Hello, sir. I have two questions in mind. So one is for all the panelists in general. It's about the credibility of World Press Index and also the people involved in coming up with this index every year. So based on the rankings for the 2023 World Press Index, India has been ranked in a very poor number. And if you compare it with other countries, even countries like Afghanistan and Somalia are having better World Press Index. So this raises question about the credibility. And also the second question is to the Indian delegate in general, because in your discussion, you told that one of the reasons why the press index ranking for India is low is because the women journalists are being harassed and nothing much has been done about it. So I mean, I'm just I'm not I just want to know, are you implying that women journalists in Afghanistan and Somalia are experiencing higher degree of freedom under the Taliban rule compared to the largest democracy in the world? Yeah, thank you.
I think will be, ma'am. Okay, Ujjalji.
The World Press Freedom Index, like, it's okay. The World Press Freedom Index by the Reporters Without Border or any other index is a research, right? And every research has its one limitations. It's one way of measuring and looking at the things. We can obviously question the credibility of any research, uh, but we also have to look at the methodology. We can question the methodology, but given the while employing the same methodology to 180 countries around the world, that was the result that was achieved, right? So there, obviously, we all can question the credibility. We all in Nepal question its credibility as well, because we tend to believe that we should not be ranked lower than Bhutan, because we all know what is the situation in Bhutan, right? So possibly Bhutan ranking the best in Press Freedom Index is also very questionable aspect of it. And they recently changed for this year. They did a bit of tweak to the methodology. That's why Bhutan was in 80 plus ranking last year. This year it's in 90. Yeah. So from last year it has come down. Same thing can happen. But what I tend to believe is that employing the methodology that RSF has developed and using the same methodology around the world in 180 countries, if the result is that, we have to accept that it has some level of truth in it, some level of reflection in it, because it was not like the method that was applied to India wasn't different than the method applied to Nepal. And also another thing about RSF index is that how this method is applied is basically they identify a number of experts in each countries and ask them to fill the same questionnaire, right? So what I believe is for the country like India, there probably are hundreds of people filling that same form, and it's the reflection of the opinion that people who have experience in press freedom, people who have the history in working in the press freedom, they have reflected that opinion. So it's not 100% truth. It's not the mirror of what it is, but it has some reflections of the situation. That's how we have to take it. And another important thing is that whenever we look at any index, it's not Nepal versus India or Pakistan versus India or Bhutan versus Nepal. It's a kind of a reflection where we have to inward looking. So we have to look at India in itself without comparing it with the other country, and then try to reflect, is it reflecting what we are? And from my experience, I worked with the International Federation of Journalists for 5 years, looking at the press freedom situation around these 8 countries in South Asia. And I have heard a lot of people who have worked in press freedom unions, press freedom institutions, in unions, and they tend to believe it has some level of credibility, not 100% credibility, but higher level of credibility than any other index right now we have. So it's like democracy. It's not the best. The RSF Press Freedom Index is not the perfect one, but it's the best we have for now.
All right. So to answer your question, number one, any quantitative measure, is indicative. Even if it's a growth rate or GDP, it's indicative. So perfect measures are not there. There are no absolute measures. What it indicates is at the moment that there has been over the last 2 decades, irrespective of the political party in power, there has been a consistent concern with regards to the indicators which measure press freedom in the country. And to answer your second part, where you expressed your concerns with regards to the women journalists, the idea of talking about women journalists is to underline the vulnerability of a woman journalist in any part of the world. And since I was talking about India, these experiences come from the Indian journalists, and most of they are in no comparison to any other country in the global south. These experiences are individual, and they are experiences which are based on, the idea of normative practices which are required for safety and security of journalists in general and women journalists in particular. I'm very sure you'll realize that most of the women journalists, reporters in the field especially, feel extremely vulnerable because of various pressures they feel in terms of, the kind of work they do, the kind of support, lack of, for instance, lack of health insurances, lack of support staff, lack of safety measures in remote places where they report from. So these experiences are narratives, and the concern which I wanted to highlight here is the absence of conversation around, the need for safety and security of women journalists in my country at the moment, because the concern was India. Otherwise, lack of safety and security is an issue for women journalists across the world. We were not drawing any comparisons here, but the case of India we were just trying to reflect on the experiences of some of the women journalists in India at the moment. All right.
Thank you.
From the audience before we give to. Is there any
Questions?
Okay, now we are close to the conclusion to the discussion. Finally, I would just like ask to our panelists for a quick remarks and regarding the prospects and way forward. What would be the best solution or something like that? Okay, I'll go for first for Mr. Acharya. 2 minutes.
Okay, I could try to take less than that, because I say it can be a huge talk on the way forward. But as I said earlier, if we want to uphold the press freedom, as Professor Busa also said, it's that we need to redefine a few things. Why there is press freedom, how it is contributing to the democracy. We have to look back at all these things before we can think of upholding these press freedom in these countries. And very important two aspects. I'll just talk about two aspects. The first is that if we want media to be enabler of press freedom or any other freedom for the citizens, then first media should be free. And to achieve that freedom, the media funding has to come from within. It can be from within the community that it serves to, but somehow it has to come from within rather than the external players. And when there are external players giving money to the media, obviously they will try to influence the media, and their influence will reflect, because it's a question of life or death for the media, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is that media need to change. Media not only need to change on how it report, to whom it report, it also need to adapt to the new technologies, how it can use the technology. Right now we are talking about all these alternative media, but there was time a few years ago, probably a couple of decades ago, when journalists would not even consider online journalists as journalists. Those people working in the online media as journalists, they were shielding them. They were shielding bloggers. They were shielding citizen journalists. Whereas they were also exercising the same right given by the same constitution, journalists were trying to put themselves on the other side of the table than those citizens. And in those contexts, unless journalists can put themselves within the public, not only to report, but also to adapt to the technology, then there is a way forward.
So a quick answer would be, number one, for the journalists themselves, we require more and more fact check and data verification exercises and building competencies within our own fraternity. It is very important that we are equipped to ensure that we deliver news and not noise. That is number one. Number two, we require news literacy amongst the digital news consumers. The digital footprint is expanding, and they are experiencing and absorbing a lot of misinformation. So we need to create an understanding of what is press freedom, what is news, what do you mean by credibility, where is the need to have this critique which all the panelists are referring to. So this diffusion of news literacy amongst the audiences is very, very important if we really want news to be delivered in its truest form, in its rightest form. Third important thing is more research, collaborative research between the media economy scholars as well as scholars of journalism. They need to come together to create more quantitative as well as qualitative insights, empirical insights into what can be those viable proposition where sustainability of news organizations as we know it can be ensured. At the moment, we do not have, we are grappling with the sustainability models that we have. We are looking at all kinds of models, subscription driven, subscription plus advertising driven, crowdsourcing models. So the model of the future has to be then come out of mixed methods research and not just quantitative data. Quantitative data can have its own limitations. So a lot of qualitative insights needs to be incorporated in order to come up with substantive research and frameworks. Then ethical frameworks in the digital news ecology. Those have to be instilled because digital news ecology can have its pros and cons. So within this quest for alternative, independent, non-partisan, pressure-free media, we also need to ensure that we have a robust ethical framework wherein the challenges posed by AI, challenges posed by chatbots can be dealt with, both from the sides of people who are creating news and also people who are consuming news. So these four can be flagged off at the moment. Rest, of course, the question of press freedom is complex, and we need more deliberations all the time. We need more discussions and conversations in order to actually come up with any answer in the future.
All right. Okay. So I agree with Mr. Ujjwal and Professor Kulveed because these are the points. Beside that, uh, journalism is not like journalism today because everybody is coming there. Politicians coming, corporate interest people coming, other people, opportunists are coming. So who are journalists, who are not journalists is a very big and gray area now. Now we have to gradually remove them, understand them. And these are the corporate people. Yes, communication is a different communication. What is public relations? So try to define that a bit separately. And those who are doing public relation things, they are not to be considered as journalists. Those who are doing corporate press advisor roles, they should not be considered as journalists. And those who are doing corporate advisors as well as corporate media as well as journalists, these should be separated. Either you do this side or that side. So we need to clean up a bit because everybody is coming there and they are playing multiple hats roles, and they're politician at the same time, journalists at the same time, and corporate agency advisor at the same time. So where we are leading to? It's not a public relation state. Public relation state is a propaganda state that creates rumor. So we have to be a bit look back again, see our roles. If I'm not in the category of real pure journalist, then I have to go out and be a public relation advisor. That's okay. But all should not be mixed up. So in this way, if we revisit ourselves, then that can help revisit ourselves and move out from this journalism field. If we are not doing the same thing, then that can help sustainability as well. If there are so many media, instead that we'll have less media, and if we have different kind of interest media instead of repeating media. So if we try to revisit in this way, maybe that can be more sustainable and all kind of media can work together simultaneously. Yeah, that's the only way.
Thank you. Insightful concluding remarks. I think after hearing, sorry.
I can't hear you. Is it my turn?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, now I can hear you. So it is my
So
turn.
I would like to request you. Sorry for the.
Thank you. No, it's perfectly okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Pandey. Well, I am a very strong believer of this maxim which says that love is not looking at each other, is looking in the same direction. And coming to this panel, I actually feel spiritually connected to all the panelists and also to the audience. Panelists, because we were able to identify more or less the problems with the press freedom in the same manner. And from the audience, that I could feel that they had very directed and very focused questions, and that also reflected their very deep concern with reference to democracy and freedom of the press. Having said that, I like to say that whenever you're talking about the media, you're basically not talking about cameras and lights, you're talking about people. And whenever we are talking about ourselves as individuals with reference to society, basically we are talking about individuals with reference to groups, that in whichever groups that we are interacting. So when it comes to me, I mean, I can't go and change Mr. A and B at the top and sort of, but I can make a difference in the circle of concern, influence that I am in. So wherever we are, I personally feel is that when you're talking about the future, we have to talk about how we are looking into our role with the others in the groups in which we are working. So it can be if we are working in media organizations, how are we working together, as Dr. Kulveen has very rightly pointed out, the collaboration and coexistence and cooperation. So, so the thing is, how are we manifesting these 3 C's within the groups that we are working in our universities, in our centers, in our media organization, and are we going beyond that? So wherever that is, I think that is very, very important, rather than looking at meta ways of bringing the change. It has to be from the groups in which we are working in. And yes, I agree that nothing is static. We are continuously evolving, and we evolve when there is a will and to make a difference. So I think what is important here is that in these kind of discussions, we must focus on the will to bring the change, have this full confidence in the humanity that we are all born good and we can all do good. So with that, we can move forward. I mean, this is more on the philosophical side, a little bit on the practical side. Yes, we do have a problem when it comes to media corporations and the freedom of the press. So I was just wondering, one way is, of course, self-regulation, the social responsibility concept. Unfortunately, our media organization have not been playing their role as a social responsible entity. At the same time, then the other one is the state regulation, which can be very problematic, though they say it is in the interest of the state, in the interest of the people, but the regulation becomes very problematic. Another alternative can be social regulation, in which we can, as audience, we can also collaborate and work together and monitor how the media is performing. And then we can also give that kind of an advice, and we can also have an interaction. So endorsing all the other suggestions, by fully endorsing all the suggestions made by the other panelists. This is something extra that I wanted to say. And on the ethical side, last thing is that we have to control ourselves with reference to hate speech, and we have to stop this process of othering, and we have to become a little more inclusive, and we have to think like one humanity or oneness with that concept. So thank you very much once again.
I have nothing to add more on the final remarks, but what I feel is that the content is still the king, and it should be treated as a secular thing. It should be secular from the all political biases or cultural biases or diversity biases. That's why I think the content is still valid, and media, the disseminator of the content should be neutral and impartial, and that should be directed to the people, not to the other influential players in the room.
Mr. Pandey, I would just like to add something. It should just not be secular. It is a very sacred thing that we are doing. When we come into communication, we are doing a very sacred thing. And it's a very sacred duty that we are doing. So I would rather than saying in a secular way, we must take it as a sacred duty.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. So the final word, I would like to, extend my sincere thanks to the, Manipal Institute of Communication, Manipal, Mahe, and all the organizing team to give the opportunity to share our insight, insights and views in the conference. And I would also like to, thank you, Madam Professor Dr. Busra. She managed time to come here, and despite being in virtual mode. So I would also like to thank you to Mr. Bhanu Acharya, Dr. Kulvin, Dr. Mr. Ujjwala Acharya for the time and insightful sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Can we have a photo together?